The old ranch house stood weathered against the Montana sky, as lonely as the man who owned it. Jack Thornton hadn't spoken more than 10 words a day since burying his wife 3 winters ago. The cattle knew his footsteps, the horses his touch, but no human had crossed his threshold in years. Until tonight. Through sheets of bitter rain, he spotted her, a slight figure at his gate, drenched to the bone, clutching a small bag like it contained all that remained of her life. Perhaps it did. Her request was simple, shelter for just 1 night. But something in her eyes spoke of storms weathered far worse than this downpour. What secrets did this young woman carry that made her seek refuge at the most isolated ranch in Elk Valley? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Thornton stood in the doorway, rain pelting his weathered hat, studying the young woman shivering at his gate. Her threadbare shawl clung to slender shoulders, offering little protection against Montana's unforgiving autumn chill. "You lost." His voice, rough from disuse, almost disappeared in the wind. "No, sir." Her eyes remained fixed on his mud-caked boots. "Just need shelter. 1 night." Jack's instinct was to turn her away. 3 years of solitude had hardened him against intrusions. Henderson's place was just 7 miles down the road. Let them deal with strays. But something in her posture, dignity despite desperation, stopped him. "Got ID?" He wasn't a fool. She reached into her soaked bag, hands trembling with cold, and produced a water-spotted driver's license. Sarah Mitchell, 24, from Minneapolis. A long way from home. Jack handed it back with a grunt. "Got a barn. Clean enough." "Thank you, sir." Relief softened her voice. "I won't be any trouble." Instead of leading her to the barn, Jack found himself opening his front door. "Kitchen's warmer." The house greeted them with shadows and silence. Jack hadn't bothered with more than functional lighting since Caroline died. Dust gathered in corners he no longer noticed. Sarah stood dripping on the worn entryway rug, clutching her bag like it might be taken from her. Jack switched on the kitchen light, revealing a space functional but unloved, dishes stacked in the sink, table cluttered with ranch paperwork. "Sit." He pointed to a chair, then rummaged for a towel. It smelled musty but was clean enough. "Dry off." "I can sleep anywhere," she said, accepting the towel with careful hands. "Floor's fine." Jack grunted. "Couch is there." He nodded toward the living room. "Bathroom down the hall." "Don't wander." The old iron stove in the corner had gone cold hours ago. Jack knelt to revive it, aware of the girl watching his every move. Each stick of kindling placed deliberately, just as Caroline had taught him when they first bought this struggling ranch. His promise to her echoed in his mind, "I'll never sell it, Care. Not ever." Sarah's soft voice interrupted his memory. "May I help? I'm good with fires." Before he could respond, she knelt beside him, arranging kindling with surprising skill. Her methodical movements spoke of experience beyond her years. "Done this before." Not a question. "Yes, sir. Worked on a dairy farm one summer." Her fingers, despite their delicate appearance, moved with practiced efficiency. The fire caught quickly under her care. Jack stood, oddly uncomfortable with her competence. "There's soup," he said, gesturing to the cupboard. It was the first time he'd offered food to anyone since the funeral. "I couldn't." "Eat or don't." He cut her off, unused to the dance of politeness. "1 night. You're gone tomorrow." She nodded, accepting his terms without complaint. As she warmed the soup, Jack retreated to his chair by the window, watching rain lash against glass. What was he doing, letting a stranger into his house? Caroline would have known exactly what to say, how to make the girl comfortable without making himself vulnerable. Sarah ate silently, each spoonful measured and careful. When finished, she washed her bowl and spoon with quiet efficiency, returning them to exactly where she'd found them. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton." Jack realized he hadn't told her his name. She must have seen it on the ranch sign. He produced a blanket and pillow from the hall closet, the linen smelling of disuse. "Like I said, 1 night." "1 night," she agreed, her voice carrying neither hope nor disappointment. Jack retreated to his bedroom but didn't sleep. Through the thin walls of the old ranch house, he listened to the quiet movements of the stranger on his couch, the first sounds of human life besides his own that these walls had heard in 3 long years. Outside, the storm continued its assault, and somewhere in the darkness, Jack sensed larger storms gathering on horizons he couldn't yet see. Dawn arrived with grudging light through rain-washed windows. Jack woke to unfamiliar sounds, quiet movements in his kitchen, the gentle clink of metal against metal. For a disorienting moment he thought Caroline had returned. Reality settled heavily as he remembered the girl. He'd half expected her to be gone by morning, disappearing as suddenly as she'd arrived. Jack pulled on his work clothes and stepped into the hallway. The smell of coffee stopped him short. Real coffee, not the instant powder he'd been drinking for years. Sarah stood at the stove, her back to him. Her hair, dry now, fell in auburn waves past her shoulders. She'd found Caroline's old apron, the cheerful floral pattern a stark contrast to the faded jeans and oversized sweater she wore. "Found the coffee," she said without turning. Something was sizzling in his cast-iron skillet, the one he'd abandoned for easier cleanup. "And some eggs in the back of your refrigerator." Jack grunted acknowledgement, uncomfortable with the domesticity of the scene. His eyes fell on Caroline's recipe book, open on the counter. The sight of his wife's handwriting sent a pang through his chest. "Hope you don't mind," Sarah continued, gesturing to the book. "Instructions for the stove. It's temperamental." The old wood-burning cook-stove had been Caroline's pride. Jack hadn't bothered with it since she died, relying on the electric hotplate for simplicity. "Works for you?" he asked, surprised. A small smile touched her lips. "We had one similar. Takes patience is all." She slid a plate toward him, eggs fried just as he liked, with toast actually browned evenly, not burned on one side and raw on the other as when he made it. Jack sat at the table that had been cleared of bills and paperwork, everything neatly stacked on the sideboard. He should feel invaded, annoyed. Instead, something like gratitude stirred. A scratching at the back door interrupted the moment. Jack rose to let in Rusty, his red cattle dog, the animals. Morning patrol completed. Rusty froze at the sight of Sarah, hackles rising slightly. "Easy," Jack murmured. Rusty had grown as solitary as his master, suspicious of the rare visitor. To Jack's surprise, Sarah knelt, making herself smaller, eyes averted from direct contact. "Hello, friend," she said softly. "You're the real boss here, aren't you?" She remained still, patient, until Rusty's curiosity overcame caution. The dog approached, sniffing cautiously, then, most shocking of all, pressed his head against her hand, requesting attention. "Traitor," Jack muttered, watching his fiercely loyal companion melt under the gentle scratch behind his ears. "Beautiful dog," Sarah said. "Australian Shepherd mix?" "Cattle dog," Jack corrected, impressed despite himself. "Most people say Border Collie." Sarah's smile widened slightly. "My uncle raised working dogs." After breakfast, Sarah stood awkwardly, hands twisting the dish towel. "I should be going. Thank you for—" "Storm's not done," Jack interrupted, looking out the window at the leaden sky. "Road to town'll be mud. You got somewhere specific to be." Her hesitation told him enough. "Nowhere to go or nowhere good." "Got fences need mending," he said gruffly. "Could use a hand. Earn your keep, you can stay another night." The relief that flashed across her face was quickly masked. "I can work. I'm stronger than I look." As if to prove herself immediately useful, she reached for his flannel shirt hanging on the hook, the one with the torn sleeve he'd been meaning to mend for months. "I can fix this tonight," she offered, fingers already examining the tear with practiced assessment. Jack nodded, uncomfortable with her eagerness to earn her place. Like she expected to be thrown out at any moment. A vehicle's distant rumble caught his attention. Through the window, he saw Sarah tense, her body instinctively shifting away from view. "Just Henderson," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "Neighbor." Her shoulders remained tight, her eyes tracking the passing truck until it disappeared down the road. Jack didn't ask. Everyone had things they'd rather leave behind. God knows he did. Instead, he reached for his work coat. Fences won't mend themselves. The western pasture fence had suffered worst from the storm. A massive pine had surrendered to the wind, crashing across the barbed wire and splitting 2 posts. Jack surveyed the damage with a practiced eye, mentally calculating the work ahead. "Cattle get out here, they'll be halfway to Idaho before we notice," he muttered. Sarah stood beside him, already wearing the work gloves he'd tossed her, old ones of Caroline's that had hung and used on the mudroom peg. They were too large for her slender hands, but she'd rolled the cuffs without complaint. "We'll need to clear the tree first," she said, eyeing the massive trunk. Jack glanced at her, surprised by the "we." Most city folk wouldn't know where to begin. "You ever run a chainsaw?" he asked skeptically. "No, but I can drag branches while you cut." The rain had settled into a persistent drizzle, soaking them as they worked. Jack cut while Sarah hauled, her slight frame belying unexpected strength. She moved with purpose, finding the most efficient path through the mud, stacking branches with methodical precision. A memory surfaced. Caroline years ago, helping just like this. He'd been teaching her ranch work, both of them young and believing they had all the time in the world. "You're a natural," he told her, laughing as she struggled with a particularly stubborn branch. "Is this okay?" Sarah's voice pulled him back. She'd created a neat pile of smaller branches, ready for burning once they dried. Jack nodded. "Better than okay." By midday, they'd cleared the tree and were setting new posts. Jack held the post driver, demonstrating the technique. Straight up and down, let the weight do the work. Sarah watched intently, then took the heavy tool. Her first attempt barely moved the post, but she adjusted, finding her rhythm. By the 3rd post, she was driving them with surprising efficiency. "You're a quick study," Jack observed. "Had plenty of jobs. Learn fast or don't eat." The simple frankness of her statement hung between them. As they stretched new wire, a truck approached along the fence line. Bill Henderson, in his mud-spattered Ford, slowed to a stop. "Jack," he called, climbing out. "Saw your lights on last night. Figured I'd check." He stopped, noticing Sarah. Jack felt her tense beside him. "Didn't know you had help," Henderson said, eyes lingering curiously on Sarah. "Just passing through," Jack replied before Sarah could speak. "Helping out for room and board." Henderson raised his eyebrows. "That right? Well, nice to meet you, miss." "Sarah," she offered quietly, not moving from the fence. "Where you headed, Sarah?" Henderson asked, his tone friendly but probing. Jack interceded. "Wire's not getting any tighter with us standing here, Bill." Henderson took the hint but couldn't resist a parting shot. "You should come by for dinner sometime, Jack. Beth's been worried about you up here alone." His eyes flicked meaningfully to Sarah. Though maybe that's changed. After Henderson left, they worked in silence until Sarah spoke. "I can leave if I'm causing trouble." Jack secured a wire strand before answering. Henderson gossips more than his wife. "No trouble." They finished the fence as afternoon shadows lengthened. Walking back toward the house, Rusty circling their heels, Jack found himself watching Sarah. The way she matched his stride despite her shorter legs. The careful attention she paid to everything. Birds calling, clouds shifting, the cattle watching from the far pasture. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For the help." She looked up, surprised. "Thank you for letting me stay another night." At the house, Jack noticed Sarah limping slightly as she removed her boots. Blisters, probably, though she hadn't complained once. "Got first aid kit in the bathroom," he said. "And Caroline's." He stopped, realizing he'd spoken his wife's name aloud for the first time in months. "There's some bath salts. For sore muscles." Sarah's smile was small but real. "I'd appreciate that." That evening, eating the simple stew she'd prepared, Jack realized he'd spoken more today than in the past year combined. After 3 days of steady work, supplies ran low. Jack stood in the pantry, tallying necessities on a scrap of paper. Flour, salt. The list grew longer than he'd anticipated. "Need to make a town run," he announced, finding Sarah on the porch, mending his torn work shirt with neat, precise stitches. Her fingers stilled. "I'll be fine here." Jack hesitated. Leaving her alone at the ranch felt strangely improper, though he couldn't articulate why. Rather you came along. Need help carrying things. The truth was simpler. He'd grown accustomed to her presence, the quiet companionship as they worked side by side. Sarah's reluctance was palpable. Is it far? Elk Valley. 20 minutes. He studied her downturned face. Problem? No. She set aside her mending. I'll get ready. In the truck, Sarah sat rigid, eyes fixed on the passing landscape. Jack drove in silence, occasionally glancing at her white-knuckled hands clasped in her lap. Elk Valley emerged around a bend, a small cluster of buildings serving the scattered ranches and farms of the county. One main street with essentials: general store, diner, post office, sheriff's department. Simple but sufficient. Jack parked in front of Valley General. Won't take long. Inside, Martha Wilson looked up from her crossword puzzle, glasses perched on her nose. Her eyes widened at the sight of Sarah trailing behind Jack. Jack Thornton. Twice in 1 month. Must be some kind of record. Martha's gaze moved openly to Sarah. And who might this be? Sarah, Jack answered curtly, reaching for a shopping basket. My ranch hand. Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Ranch hand? Well, isn't that progressive? Jack ignored her, moving through the narrow aisles. Sarah stayed close, her eyes cataloging everything with the careful assessment he'd come to recognize. Someone accustomed to calculating what she could and couldn't afford. Get what you need, he told her quietly. Food, clothes, whatever. Sarah shook her head. I'm fine. As they gathered supplies, Martha called across the store. Heard you had visitors yesterday, Jack. Bill mentioned you had help. Her tone made the words sound suspect. Before Jack could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Sheriff Cooper entered, his weathered face creasing in surprise at the sight of Jack. Thornton. Been a while. Cooper nodded, then his gaze settled on Sarah. Something flickered in his expression, professional interest, not merely curiosity. Sarah ducked behind a display of canned goods. Sheriff, Jack acknowledged, positioning himself between Cooper and Sarah. Just stocking up. Cooper moved to the counter, speaking quietly with Martha. Their eyes occasionally drifted toward Sarah. Jack found her examining livestock supplements, her knowledge evident in the brands she considered. This one's better for winter feeding, she said, indicating a mineral block. More copper, helps with coat thickness. Jack nodded, impressed again. You really did work on farms. A small smile. Told you. At the register, Martha rang up their items with deliberate slowness, eyes darting between them. Quite the haul. Setting up for a long stay, are we? Just preparing for winter, Jack replied flatly. Cooper lingered by the bulletin board near the door. As they passed, Jack noticed his gaze tracking Sarah with professional assessment. Outside, Sarah exhaled shakily. She doesn't like me. Martha doesn't like anyone under 60. Jack loaded their supplies. Especially women. Sarah climbed into the truck, visibly relieved to be leaving. As Jack started the engine, Cooper emerged from the store, watching them pull away. The drive back was silent until they reached the ranch gates. Sarah spoke softly, Thank you. For what? For saying I was your ranch hand. Not. She trailed off. Jack understood. Not a stray. Not a charity case. Not whatever rumors Martha was already spreading. You are helping, he said simply. That makes you a ranch hand. That evening, Sarah organized the pantry with methodical efficiency. Jack watched from the doorway as she transformed the chaotic space into something ordered and sensible. Just like she'd done with the kitchen, the living room, the mudroom. With his life, he realized with uncomfortable clarity. Sheriff was watching you, he said finally. Sarah's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. I noticed. Anything I should know? Her hand stilled on a can of beans. Nothing bad. I promise. Jack nodded, choosing to believe her. Another day, then? For the east fence. The relief in her smile was answer enough. The storm arrived without warning, a monstrous system that swept down from Canada, bringing winds that bent the pines and rain that fell in sheets rather than drops. Jack woke to the house shuddering against the onslaught. He found Sarah already in the kitchen, placing buckets beneath 3 separate leaks in the ceiling. "Been meaning to fix that," he said, embarrassed by the neglect made visible through her eyes. "Fourth one started in the living room," she replied, handing him a pot without judgment. By noon, the storm had settled into a relentless pattern that forecasters predicted would last 3 days. The creek behind the barn rose steadily, threatening the lower pasture. "Cattle need moving to higher ground," Jack said, pulling on his slicker. Sarah was already reaching for Caroline's old raincoat. "I'll help." Outside, the wind stole their words, forcing them to communicate through gestures and nods. The cattle, anxious and stubborn, resisted being moved from their familiar territory. Jack watched as Sarah positioned herself with instinctive skill, anticipating where an animal might bolt, turning the herd with subtle pressure. They worked in unconscious synchrony, as if they'd been handling cattle together for years rather than days. Back at the house, soaked and mud-splattered, Jack built up the fire while Sarah made coffee. The routine felt strangely comfortable. "Phones will be down," Jack said, listening to the wind howling through the eaves. "Roads too, likely." Sarah nodded, watching raindrops race down the window glass. "We're trapped." The way she said it, not with panic but with quiet acceptance, made Jack wonder what other traps she'd endured. That evening, with rain still battering the roof, a particularly loud crack sent them both to the window. Water streamed from a new split in the roof's edge, pouring down the exterior wall. "Need to divert it," Jack said, "or it'll flood the foundation." Together they worked in the downpour, digging a trench to channel the water away from the house. Sarah's hair plastered to her face, her borrowed clothes sodden, yet she never slowed or complained. Later, huddled by the fire in dry clothes, Jack found himself studying her as she combed through her damp hair. Her movements were efficient, practical, like everything she did. No wasted motion. "You've been homeless," he said suddenly, the realization crystallizing. Her hand stilled. "Yes." "How long?" "On and off since 17. She resumed, combing, eyes on the fire. "Not always on the streets. Sometimes had rooms. Jobs." Jack absorbed this, thinking of her competence with every task, her careful use of resources, the way she ate, like someone who knew hunger. "Must have been hard." A small shrug. "You adapt." A loud thump from upstairs startled them both. Jack climbed to the second floor to find a ceiling panel had collapsed, rain pouring in onto Caroline's old sewing room. The room he hadn't entered in 3 years. Sarah appeared behind him. Together they worked to cover the furniture with tarps, salvaging what they could. In the process, a photo album fell from the shelf. It opened to reveal Jack and Caroline on their wedding day, young and laughing. "She was beautiful," Sarah said softly. Jack stared at the image of his wife. Caroline. Her name was Caroline. "How long were you married?" 22 years. Jack closed the album gently. "Cancer took her. 3 years ago." Sarah's hand briefly touched his arm, the first time she had initiated contact. "I'm sorry." That night, with the storm still raging, Jack heard Sarah cry out in her sleep. He found her on the couch, caught in the grip of a nightmare, her face contorted in fear. "Sarah," he called softly, "you're safe." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused until they found his face. "Jack." "Just a dream," he said, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "You're at the ranch. You're safe." She nodded, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "No need." He hesitated. "Had my share of bad nights." They sat in silence, listening to the storm, until Sarah spoke. "Thank you for letting me stay. Way this rain's going, you might be stuck here a while." Her small smile in the firelight suggested this wasn't entirely unwelcome news. The storm's 3rd day brought clear skies but impassable roads. Jack returned from checking the eastern fence line to find the house unusually quiet. No movement in the kitchen, no Sarah tending to some previously neglected corner. "Sarah?" he called, a hint of concern edging his voice. A soft sound answered, not her voice, but a single, tentative piano note. Jack followed the sound to the formal sitting room he'd avoided for 3 years. The door, usually kept firmly shut, stood ajar. Inside, Sarah sat at Caroline's baby grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. A cloth in her hand suggested she'd been dusting when temptation overcame her. She looked up, guilt flashing across her face. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, rising. "I shouldn't have." "You play." Jack interrupted, his voice rougher than intended. Sarah hesitated. "A little. There was a church near one shelter. They let me practice sometimes." Jack stared at the instrument, its polished surface now free of dust. Caroline had played every evening after dinner, filling the house with everything from classical pieces to the country songs Jack preferred. "It's out of tune," he said, the words coming out clipped. "Just a bit sharp," Sarah agreed, still poised to retreat. "I didn't mean to intrude." Jack struggled with conflicting impulses, to shut the door, preserve the room exactly as Caroline had left it, or to let light and music back into this space. "Play something," he said finally. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" Jack nodded, not trusting his voice, and lowered himself into the armchair opposite the piano. Sarah sat carefully, arranging her hands with obvious reverence for the instrument. After a moment's hesitation, she began to play, something simple at first, a folk melody that gradually gained complexity as her confidence grew. The slightly out-of-tune notes nevertheless filled the room with warmth that had been absent too long. Jack closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, surprised when it brought comfort rather than pain. When Sarah finished, silence hung between them until Jack opened his eyes to find her watching him uncertainly. "Caroline played every day," he said quietly, even toward the end when she had to rest between songs. Sarah's expression softened with understanding. She had beautiful hands. Jack looked up sharply. "The photos," Sarah explained. "Long fingers. Pianist's hands." Jack nodded, remembering how he'd loved watching those hands move across the keys. "She tried teaching me once. Said I had the musical talent of a fence post." A small smile curved Sarah's lips. "Everyone can learn something simple." Before he could object, she was motioning him to the bench beside her. Jack found himself sitting at the piano for the first time since Caroline's death, Sarah's shoulder warm against his. "Just one finger," she instructed, taking his weathered hand and guiding his index finger to a key. "This is C. Now D. Now E." The simple sequence felt awkward under his calloused finger, but Sarah's patient guidance slowly built a recognizable melody, the first line of Amazing Grace. "I'm playing," he said, surprised. "You are," she confirmed, her smile wider now. A sudden knock at the front door startled them both. Jack's hand fell discordantly on the keys as he rose. Pastor Miller stood on the porch, his ancient truck parked beside Jack's in the yard. "Thought I'd check on you after that storm." His eyes moved past Jack to where Sarah stood uncertainly in the hallway. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Sarah's staying at the ranch," Jack said, surprised by how easily the words came. "Not passing through, or temporary help, anymore." Miller's kind face registered interest but not judgment. "Wonderful to meet you, Sarah. We've all been hoping Jack would have some company up here." "Just helping out," Sarah murmured. "Well, I'm glad. And I heard music. The piano playing again. Caroline would be pleased." Jack tensed at her name in someone else's mouth, but found the sharp pain he expected had dulled to a more bearable ache. "We're having a special service Sunday," Miller continued. "Thanksgiving theme. Both of you would be most welcome." After the pastor left, Jack and Sarah stood awkwardly in the entryway. "You don't have to go," Jack said. "To church." "Would you like to go?" she asked, watching his face carefully. Jack hadn't set foot in the church since Caroline's funeral. But somehow, the thought didn't bring the usual dread. "Could," he said gruffly. "If you wanted." That evening, the piano's gentle notes once again filled the house. The scream tore Jack from sleep, a sound so primal it raised the hair on his neck. He was moving before fully awake, grabbing the shotgun beside his bed out of long habit. In the living room, Sarah thrashed against invisible restraints, still caught in the grip of sleep. "No, please, oh. Sarah." Jack set aside the gun, approaching cautiously. "Sarah, wake up." Her eyes flew open, wild with terror. She scrambled backward, hand darting beneath her pillow. Jack froze as moonlight glinted off metal, a small knife clutched in her trembling fingers. "It's Jack," he said softly. "You're at the ranch. You're safe." Recognition slowly dawned. Sarah lowered the knife, shame replacing fear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jack eased onto the edge of the couch, maintaining distance. "Bad one?" She nodded, wiping tears with her sleeve. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Been there," he said simply. "Want some water?" In the kitchen, Jack switched on. A single lamp, its gentle glow creating an island of warmth in the darkness. Sarah followed, knife still clutched in her hand, as if she couldn't bear to relinquish it. "Had it long?" Jack asked, nodding toward the blade. Sarah glanced down, seeming almost surprised to find it in her grip. 3 years. Jack didn't press. He handed her a glass of water, then busied himself building a small fire in the kitchen stove. The ritual of arranging kindling gave her time to collect herself. "His name was Richard," she said suddenly, her voice small in the quiet kitchen. "I met him when I was 21. Thought he was different. Kind." Jack kept his movement steady, giving her space to continue or stop. "He was wealthy. Powerful. Made me feel safe at first." Her fingers tightened around the knife. Then he started changing. Small things. Controlling things. Where I went. Who I saw. The fire caught, flames illuminating Sarah's face, younger somehow in the golden light, more vulnerable. "When I tried to leave her voice faltered. He said no one leaves him. That he'd always find me." Jack sat across from her, careful to move slowly. "Has he been looking?" 3 years, she confirmed. "I change towns when I start seeing the same car too often. Or when local police suddenly take interest in me." Understanding dawned. "Like Sheriff Cooper." She nodded. "Sometimes Richard pays them. Sometimes just asks questions, flashes my photo." "That why you showed up here? Middle of nowhere?" "Saw your ranch on a back road. Thought maybe, just one night." A ghost of a smile. "Didn't expect you to be so decent." Jack absorbed her story, anger building at this unseen man who haunted her sleep. "He can't reach you here. He always finds me eventually." "He'd have to get through me first," Jack said, the protectiveness in his voice surprising them both. Sarah studied him as if assessing the truth of his words. "I have nightmares about Caroline too," he admitted. "Not her being sick. But me doing everything wrong. Not saying what I should have. Not being what she needed." "I'm sure that's not true." "Maybe. Maybe not." Jack stared into the fire. "Grief messes with your head. Makes you see the past all wrong. Fear does the same," Sarah said softly. "Makes monsters bigger than they are." They sat in comfortable silence until the eastern sky began lightening through the window. Sarah's hand no longer clutched the knife with desperate intensity. "Christmas is coming," Jack observed, changing the subject. "Town puts up lights soon." Sarah looked surprised at the mundane turn. "I lose track of dates sometimes." Henderson mentioned a Christmas market. "Crafts and such. Town fundraiser." Jack hadn't attended in years, but found himself adding, "Could go. If you wanted." "I'd like that," she said, a small but genuine smile warming her face. As dawn painted the kitchen in soft light, Jack realized something profound had shifted between them. The woman across from him was no longer a stranger seeking temporary shelter. She had entrusted him with her fears, her story. And somehow, he had shared pieces of himself he'd locked away for years. "Guess we should start the day," he said, rising. "Unless you want to try sleeping again?" Sarah shook her head. "I'll make breakfast." As she moved around the kitchen with growing familiarity, Jack noticed she'd tucked the knife into her pocket, still present, but no longer clutched like a lifeline. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, frost painting intricate patterns on the windows. Jack stood before his closet, staring at the suit he hadn't worn since Caroline's funeral. His fingers brushed the fabric, remembering how she'd chosen it, insisting the dark blue brought out his eyes. He found a clean white shirt, surprised it still fit. The tie gave him trouble. Caroline had always tied it for him. Need help? Sarah stood in the doorway, her quiet voice startling him. Jack turned, words failing as he saw her. She wore a simple dress, one of Caroline's, he realized. The floral pattern faded but still pretty. She'd taken it in somehow, adapting it to her smaller frame. Her hair, usually pulled back practically, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. "Sorry," she said, misreading his silence. "I found it in the closet. I should have asked." "No," Jack interrupted. "It's fine. She'd like that someone was using it." Sarah stepped forward, gesturing to his fumbled tie. "May I?" Her fingers worked efficiently, the routine clearly familiar. Jack wondered who she had done this for before, but didn't ask. "There," she said, stepping back to assess her work. They drove to town in comfortable silence. Jack found himself increasingly aware of her presence beside him. The subtle scent of the lavender soap she'd found in the bathroom, the way sunlight caught in her hair. Elk Valley's small white church stood on the town's edge, its steeple reaching toward the clear Montana sky. Cars already filled the gravel lot, ranchers and townspeople gathering for the special service. Sarah tensed as Jack parked. "Everyone will stare." "Let them," he said with surprising firmness. As they walked toward the church steps, Jack found himself offering his arm without thought. Sarah hesitated, then slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. The warm interior hummed with conversation that faltered noticeably as they entered. Jack felt every eye turn toward them. Jack Thornton, the recluse, with an unknown young woman on his arm. Pastor Miller approached immediately, his genuine welcome creating a buffer against the curious stares. "Jack, Sarah, I'm so glad you came." A cluster of elderly women converged next, led by Irene Baker, who had brought casseroles after Caroline's funeral until Jack had gruffly asked her to stop. "Jack Thornton, as I live and breathe," Irene exclaimed, her eyes bright with curiosity. "And who is this lovely young lady?" "Sarah," Jack said simply, surprising himself by adding, "she's staying at the ranch." The women enveloped Sarah with the particular warmth reserved for newcomers, leading her toward a pew while peppering her with questions. Jack followed, nodding awkwardly to faces he hadn't seen in years. He spotted Sheriff Cooper near the back, watching Sarah with that same professional interest. The service began with familiar hymns. Jack stood silently until he felt Sarah's gentle nudge. She held the hymnal between them, her finger marking the place, her soft voice rising with the congregation. Jack found himself humming along, remembering how Caroline had always teased him about his tone-deaf singing. Pastor Miller's sermons centered on unexpected blessings and second chances. Jack found the words striking uncomfortably close to home. "Sometimes grace arrives in forms we don't anticipate," Miller said, his kind eyes seeming to rest on Jack and Sarah. "The question is whether we're brave enough to recognize it, to open our doors when opportunity knocks." During the final hymn, Sarah's hand brushed against Jack's on the pew between them. Without thinking, he turned his palm upward, and her fingers slid naturally into his. After the service, they navigated a gauntlet of curious greetings. Jack found himself introducing Sarah repeatedly, growing more comfortable with each iteration. Some faces from his past seemed genuinely pleased to see him emerging from isolation. Others, he noted, watched with judgment poorly disguised as concern. Outside, Sheriff Cooper intercepted them at the steps. "Thornton. Miss Mitchell." Jack felt Sarah stiffen beside him. "Beautiful service," Cooper continued. "Been meaning to stop by the ranch. Just some routine questions." "About?" Jack asked, his tone cooling. "Nothing important. Maybe this week." Cooper's gaze lingered on Sarah. "Enjoy your Sunday." As they drove home, Sarah stared out the window, her earlier animation fading. "He knows something." "Doesn't matter," Jack said firmly. "You're staying at the ranch. With me." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to examine. At home, Sarah changed back into jeans but left her hair down. Jack found he missed the pressure of her hand in his. The mail came on Tuesday, a rare event for the isolated ranch. Jack heard the ancient postal jeep grinding up the drive and met Earl, the carrier, at the gate. Afternoon, Jack. Earl handed over a small bundle. Nice to see smoke from your chimney again. Place was looking too quiet. Jack nodded, thumbing through the stack, mostly catalogs and a few bills. A cream-colored envelope bearing the Mesa Creek Bank logo caught his attention. He'd been avoiding their calls for months. Martha says you've got help these days, Earl continued, never one to miss an opportunity for gossip. Young lady. Sarah, Jack confirmed, unwilling to elaborate. Good. Place needs a woman's touch. Earl glanced toward the house hopefully, but Jack didn't invite him in. Back inside, Jack found Sarah organizing a kitchen cabinet, the contents spread methodically across the counter. Found some mason jars in the cellar, she explained. Thought we could use them for the dried herbs. Jack nodded absently, the bank envelope heavy in his hand. He retreated to his office, really just a small room off the kitchen with a desk he rarely used. The letter confirmed what he already knew: the ranch was in trouble. Caroline's medical bills, combined with 3 poor seasons, had left him precariously behind on the mortgage. The final notice warned of proceedings that would begin after the new year. Lost in grim calculations, Jack didn't hear Sarah until she spoke from the doorway. Jack? I made lunch. He looked up, hastily folding the letter, but not before she glimpsed the bank logo. Everything okay? She asked, her perception too sharp to miss his expression. Fine. The word came out harsher than intended. Sarah hesitated, then set a sandwich beside him. I've been thinking about the Christmas market Pastor Miller mentioned. I could make some things to sell. I'm good with knitting and... We don't need charity, Jack interrupted, the financial pressure making him defensive. It's not charity to earn my keep, she replied quietly. Jack rubbed his face, the accumulated strain of the past years suddenly overwhelming. Ranch is in trouble. Has been since Caroline got sick. Market won't fix it. Sarah absorbed this, her eyes moving to the stack of unopened notices on his desk. How bad? Bad enough. Jack pushed back from the desk. But it's my problem. I have some money, she said carefully. Not much, but... No. Jack stood abruptly. I'm not taking your money. It wouldn't be taking. It would be... She searched for the right word. Contributing. I'm living here too. Temporarily, Jack reminded her, though the word felt increasingly hollow. Sarah's expression shuddered. Temporarily. She turned to leave, then stopped. Where I come from, accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. Left alone, Jack stared at the faded photograph on his desk. Him and Caroline on the day they bought the ranch. Young, hopeful, certain they could make it work despite everyone's warnings about the difficulty. I promised her, he said to the empty room. Later, he found Sarah in the guest room, a small bag open on the bed, her few possessions being carefully packed. What are you doing? He asked, though it was obvious. I think it's time I moved on. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I've imposed long enough. Jack leaned against the doorframe, shame washing over him. I was out of line. Don't go. You made it clear this is temporary. And you're right. She continued, folding a borrowed sweater. I should have left days ago. I don't want you to leave, Jack admitted, the words difficult but honest. Sarah stilled. I don't want to be somewhere I'm not wanted. You are wanted. The intensity in his voice surprised them both. I'm just not good at this anymore. Having someone around. Sarah studied him, weighing his sincerity. The bank notice. How long do you have? Jack sighed, barriers crumbling. Till January. Then they start foreclosure. Then we have until January to figure something out, she said, emphasis on the we. Sarah. I'm good with budgets. Had to be. She set down the sweater, decision made. Let me look at the numbers. No commitment, just... Jack struggled with pride and practical necessity. Finally, he nodded. Okay. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by statements and invoices. Sarah's organizational skills brought clarity to the financial mess Jack had been avoiding. It's not hopeless, she concluded, her practical optimism a balm to his fatalism. But we need a plan. Jack found himself watching her face as she worked, realizing how quickly I had become we in his life, and how much he wanted it to stay that way. The Elk Valley Christmas market had been a tradition for decades, a weekend when the community hall transformed into a festive bazaar of local crafts, baked goods, and holiday cheer. Jack had attended in years past with Caroline, but never as a vendor. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, watching Sarah sort through balls of yarn she discovered in the attic. "The market's perfect timing," she replied, her fingers working knitting needles with practiced skill. 2 weeks until Christmas. People looking for gifts. In the evenings after ranch work, Sarah created with quiet intensity, knitted scarves, fingerless gloves, small ornaments fashioned from pine cones and bits of ribbon. Jack found himself drawn to his own forgotten talents, retreating to the workshop behind the barn where he'd once crafted furniture as a hobby. The smell of pine shavings and linseed oil awakened memories. Oline bringing him coffee, admiring his latest project, suggesting small improvements. For the first time, these recollections brought comfort rather than pain. When Sarah discovered his workshop, her admiration was genuine. "These are beautiful," she said, running her fingers over a small wooden box he'd just completed. "You could sell these for 3 times what the materials cost." The morning of the market dawned bright and cold. They loaded Jack's truck with their handcrafted goods, Sarah nervously arranging and rearranging displays. "What if no one buys anything?" she worried, an unusual crack in her practical demeanor. "Then we bring it all home," Jack said simply. Nothing lost. Main Street had been transformed with garlands, lights, and fresh pine boughs. The community hall bustled with vendors setting up tables, the air fragrant with cinnamon and pine. Pastor Miller greeted them warmly. "Jack Thornton, haven't seen you at the market in years." And Sarah, "How wonderful." Their assigned table sat between Irene Baker's legendary baked goods and Tom Wilson's handcrafted leather items. Tom eyed Jack's woodwork with professional assessment. "Nice joinery," he commented, examining a jewelry box. "Didn't know you were still making these." "Started again recently," Jack replied, surprised by the pride he felt. As shoppers filled the hall, Sarah's initial nervousness transformed into warm engagement. She described her knitting techniques to interested customers, wrapped purchases in simple brown paper tied with twine, and smiled more freely than Jack had ever seen. Jack found himself drawn into conversations with neighbors he'd avoided for years. Some spoke of Caroline with gentle remembrance rather than the awkward condolences he'd come to dread. Others simply treated him as part of the community again, a status he hadn't realized he'd missed. By midday, half their inventory had sold. Sarah's cheeks were flushed with success as she carefully tucked bills into an old tin cash box. "We might make enough for the first payment," she whispered excitedly when there was a lull in customers. Jack nodded, allowing himself to share her optimism. "Your things are selling better than mine." "Because they're more affordable," she countered loyally. "The people buying your pieces recognize their value." During the afternoon rush, Jack stepped away to buy coffee for them both. Returning, he saw Sheriff Cooper at their table, speaking intently with Sarah. Her posture had gone rigid, her smile replaced by wariness. Jack quickened his pace. "Sheriff, enjoying the market?" Cooper nodded, accepting the interruption smoothly. "Just telling Miss Mitchell how impressed I am with her craftsmanship. My mother was a knitter." Sarah's tight smile suggested the conversation had covered more than knitting patterns. After Cooper moved on, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she rearranged her remaining scarves. "He asked how long I planned to stay in Elk Valley." "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't decided." She glanced up at Jack. "I should have asked you first." "It's your ranch." "It's your decision," Jack said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur. As they packed unsold items at day's end, Martha Wilson approached their table. "Well," she said, looking between them with shrewd assessment, "aren't you two the talk of the market? The recluse and his mystery woman." Jack bristled, but Sarah spoke first. "Nothing mysterious about handmade gifts, Mrs. Wilson. Will you be back tomorrow? I'm making fresh scarves tonight." Martha seemed taken aback by Sarah's direct friendliness. "Well, Yes, I suppose I will. Walking to the truck, Sarah's hand brushed against Jack's. Without thinking, he captured it in his own. Her fingers curled naturally around his, warm despite the December chill. Good day, he said, the simple words encompassing much more than market sales. Sarah squeezed his hand. The best I've had in a very long time. The second day of the market proved even more successful than the first. By closing time, they had earned enough for the January mortgage payment with some left over. Jack watched Sarah count the money twice, her face alight with triumph. We did it, she said, the we now completely natural between them. The drive home was filled with plans, ideas for more crafts, calculations for the February payment, possibilities neither had dared consider a week earlier. As Jack turned onto the ranch road, Sarah grew quiet. Jack, there's something I need to tell you. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. About Sheriff Cooper? About everything. Her voice held resolve tinged with fear. Before Cooper tells you his version. Inside, Sarah paced the kitchen while Jack built a fire in the stove. The domestic routine felt at odds with the tension building between them. My full name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, she began, her back straight but her fingers twisting together. 3 years ago, I was working as an administrative assistant at Westridge Financial in Minneapolis. Jack listened silently as she continued. That's where I met Richard Harwood. He was the vice president. Wealthy family, connections everywhere. Her voice took on a hollow quality. He was charming. Made me feel special. The poor girl from nowhere suddenly dating one of the city's most eligible bachelors. She reached for her bag, withdrew a folded newspaper clipping, and placed it on the table between them. Jack saw a society page photo of Sarah, almost unrecognizable in elegant evening wear, beside a handsome man with cold eyes. We dated for 8 months. He wanted me to move in. I thought it was because... She swallowed. But it was about control. He needed to know where I was, who I spoke to. When I went out without his permission, there were consequences. He hurt you, Jack stated, his voice dangerously quiet. Sarah nodded. Never where it would show. He was too careful for that. Jack's hands curled into fists. Why didn't you leave sooner? I tried once. He found me at my friend's apartment. Her voice dropped. He hurt her too. Said it was my fault for involving her. The kitchen felt too small to contain the rage building in Jack's chest. He focused on Sarah's face, forcing himself to listen rather than react. The last night he'd been drinking. Said he was tired of my ingratitude. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs. I thought he might kill me. When he finally passed out, I took what cash I could find and ran. And he's been looking ever since. Sarah nodded. His family has a foundation that helps find missing persons. The perfect cover. 3 times I've settled somewhere, started over. 3 times, someone's shown up asking questions. Private investigators, local police. Sheriff Cooper? He received a missing persons report. Photo, description. Sarah's eyes met high. His directly. Richard claims I'm mentally unstable. That I stole from him. Jack absorbed this, the pieces fitting together, her caution, her nightmares, the knife under her pillow. Why tell me now? Because Cooper's going to run a background check. Because she faltered. Because I care about you too much to keep lying. The simple honesty in her voice pierced through Jack's defenses. I've never stolen anything, she continued. Never hurt anyone. But Richard has resources, connections. If he finds me here, it could mean trouble for you, for the ranch. Let him come, Jack said, the cold fury in his voice surprising them both. You don't understand. He's dangerous. Vindictive. So am I, when protecting what matters. Jack moved closer, his calloused hands gently taking hers. You're not running anymore, Sarah. Tears filled her eyes. I'm tired of running. Then stop. It's not that simple. It is. Jack's voice held certainty. We'll talk to Cooper tomorrow. Tell him everything. File a report. Sarah looked doubtful. Richard has connections in law enforcement. Not here. Not in Elk Valley. Jack's thumb brushed across her knuckles. This is my home. No one threatens what's mine. The possessive declaration hung between them, its implications unmistakable. Sarah's eyes widened, a question in their depths. Jack stepped closer, one hand rising to gently cup her cheek. The gesture, so foreign to his recent existence, felt like coming home. Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. The ringing phone shattered the moment. Jack reluctantly moved to answer it, his eyes still on Sarah. Thornton. Sheriff Cooper's voice came through clearly. Jack, we need to talk about your house guest. I've received some concerning information. Jack's gaze locked with Sarah's. Funny. I was about to call you about the same thing. Sheriff Cooper arrived early the next morning, his expression grave but not unfriendly. Jack and Sarah sat across from him at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee between them like a buffer. I received a call from Minneapolis PD, Cooper began, inquiring about a Sarah Mitchell. Sarah nodded, her composure hard-won. Richard Harwood? His name was mentioned. Cooper studied her face. Care to tell me your side? For the next hour, Sarah recounted her history with Richard, her escape, the pattern of harassment that followed. Jack remained at her side, his steady presence anchoring her through the difficult telling. Cooper took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, he sat back, considering. Minneapolis PD made it sound urgent. Almost like you were dangerous. Cooper's experienced eyes assessed Sarah. But that doesn't match what I've seen since you arrived. Richard has connections, Sarah explained. Money opens doors, creates narratives. Cooper nodded slowly. I've been in law enforcement 30 years. Seen plenty of abusers with resources hide behind respectability. He closed his notebook. I'll make some calls. Speak to domestic violence advocates I trust in Minneapolis. Get the real story. What should we do meanwhile? Jack asked. Live your lives, Cooper advised. But be aware. If this Harwood has tracked you to Montana, he might show up. He stood, placing his card on the table. Call me anytime, day or night. After he left, Sarah released a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. He believed me. Of course he did, Jack said, squeezing her hand. Truth has its own sound. The days that followed held a strange duality. The shadow of Richard's potential arrival contrasted with the approaching brightness of Christmas. By unspoken agreement, they chose to focus on the latter. We should get a tree, Jack suggested one morning. If you want. Sarah looked up from her knitting, surprise giving way to pleasure. I'd like that. They drove to the northern edge of the property where pines grew thick and straight. Jack carried his axe, Sarah a thermos of hot chocolate. Rusty bounded ahead through the snow, delighted by the expedition. Caroline and I used to do this every year, Jack said as they searched for the perfect tree. Had a whole ritual. Hot chocolate. Singing carols badly. Sarah smiled, her breath visible in the cold air. What was her favorite carol? Silent Night, Jack answered, the memory warming rather than wounding. She had a beautiful voice. My mother loved Oh Holy Night, Sarah offered. When I was little, before she left, we'd decorate while she sang. Jack paused, axe in hand. You never mentioned your family before. Sarah's eyes remained on the distant mountains. Not much to tell. Father was never in the picture. Mother left when I was 12. Foster care after that. The matter-of-fact delivery made the revelation all the more poignant. Jack touched her arm gently. Christmas was hard then. Sometimes. Her smile returned, determined. But not this year. They selected a perfect blue spruce, Jack felling it with practice strokes. Together they carried it home, the simple activity feeling like a declaration. They were creating traditions, building something neither had expected to find again. In the attic, Jack located boxes of Christmas decorations untouched for 3 years. Sarah handled each ornament with reverence, recognizing each as a story, a memory. Caroline made this one, Jack explained, holding a ceramic star painted with delicate snowflakes. She made a new one every year. It's beautiful, Sarah said, hanging it carefully on a prominent branch. As the afternoon faded into evening, The tree took shape, a collection of memories old and new. Sarah contributed small ornaments she'd crafted from pine cones and scraps of fabric, adding her touch to the tradition. Jack disappeared briefly, returning with a small wooden star he'd carved in his workshop. "For the top," he said, handing it to her. Sarah's eyes widened at the intricate design. "When did you make this?" "Last few evenings." Jack's ears reddened slightly. "Thought we needed something new." Together they placed it atop the tree, their hands meeting around the smooth wood. That night, Jack taught Sarah his family's cookie recipes, old German formulas passed through generations. She proved an apt student, laughing when flour dusted her nose, relaxing into the domestic rhythm they'd established. Pastor Miller and his wife visited briefly, bringing a poinsettia and holiday wishes. They praised the tree, accepted cookies, and left with the comfortable assurance of returning for Christmas Eve. Later, as they sat before the fire admiring their work, Sarah leaned slightly against Jack's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For making Christmas feel possible again." Jack's arms circled her shoulders, the gesture now natural between them. "You've done the same for me." Outside, snow began to fall, wrapping the ranch in quiet. Stillness. 3 days before Christmas, Jack woke to Rusty's low growl. The dog stood tense at the bedroom window, eyes fixed on the driveway. Through frost-edged glass, Jack spotted an unfamiliar black luxury car approaching the ranch house. His first thought was of Sarah. He dressed quickly, tucking his father's old revolver into his waistband before heading downstairs. Sarah was already in the kitchen, face pale as she peered through the curtains. "It's him," she whispered, her voice stripped of the confidence she'd gained in recent weeks. "Richard." Jack moved beside her, studying the man emerging from the expensive car. Tall, impeccably dressed in a cashmere overcoat, with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to getting his way. A second man exited the passenger side, older, carrying a leather briefcase. "Who's the other one?" Jack asked quietly. "Probably his lawyer. Or a private investigator." Sarah stepped back from the window, arms wrapped around herself. "Jack, I should leave. Go out the back before they—" "No." Jack's voice was firm. "We face this together. Like we agreed." A sharp knock at the door punctuated his words. Rusty growled again, positioning himself protectively in front of Sarah. Jack squeezed her shoulder. "Stay behind me." Richard Harwood's smile was camera-ready, his extended hand manicured to perfection. "You must be Mr. Thornton. I'm Richard Harwood. I believe you've been looking after something that belongs to me." Jack deliberately ignored the outstretched hand. "Nothing here belongs to you." "I beg to differ." Richard's smile didn't waver, though his eyes hardened. "Sarah, darling, you've led me on quite a chase." Sarah stepped forward, standing beside Jack rather than behind him. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Richard." "Of course you are." Richard's tone remained pleasant, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. "You're confused as usual. Mr. Peterson here has the proper documentation." The older man stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, I'm James Peterson, Mr. Harwood's attorney. We have concerns about Miss Mitchell's mental state. There's a history of instability, medication non-compliance." "Lies," Sarah said, her voice stronger than Jack expected. "Sarah has stolen property belonging to Mr. Harwood," Peterson continued smoothly. "And there are concerns about her financial dealings. We're prepared to resolve this quietly, without police involvement." Jack's hand moved instinctively closer to the revolver. "Sheriff Cooper's already involved. Knows the whole story." Richard's expression flickered. "Does he know about Sarah's previous troubles?" "The restraining order her former roommate filed." "Lisa never filed any restraining order," Sarah countered. "You paid someone to forge that after I fled." "You see the delusions?" Richard addressed Jack with practiced concern. "This has been our challenge. Sarah creates elaborate fantasies when she stops her medication." Jack had heard enough. "You need to leave. Now." "Mr. Thornton," Peterson interjected, "I'd advise against interfering in a private matter. Mr. Harwood has considerable resources and influence." "Is that a threat?" Jack's voice lowered dangerously. A reality check. Richard's facade slipped, revealing something cold beneath. This is a lovely ranch. Would be a shame if legal complications arose regarding its ownership. I understand you're already facing financial difficulties. Jack stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Get off my property. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're making a serious mistake. Sarah isn't worth it. Ask her about the money she took. The credit card charges. He gave me that card, Sarah said, moving to Jack's side. Then reported it stolen when I used it to escape. Richard's calculated composure cracked further. You ungrateful little... He caught himself, the mask slipping back into place. Sarah, be reasonable. You know how this ends. Come home now, and Mr. Thornton keeps his struggling ranch. This is my home now, Sarah stated, her hand finding Jack's. The simple gesture seemed to infuriate Richard more than any words could have. His eyes fixed on their clasped hands, a muscle twitching in his jaw. You've known her what, a month? Richard addressed Jack with contempt. I've known her for years. She'll run when things get difficult. She always does. Leave, Jack repeated, stepping onto the porch, forcing Richard and Peterson back. And don't return. Richard's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither do you, Jack replied, his calm certainty more effective than anger. When the black car finally disappeared down the driveway, Sarah released a shuddering breath. Jack turned to her, taking both her hands in his. You okay? She nodded, though her face remained pale. He'll be back. With something worse. Let him try. Jack's thumb brushed across her knuckles. We'll be ready. The fear in Sarah's eyes was tempered with something new, a fierce determination that matched his own. Without thinking, Jack leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a promise more binding than words. When they parted, Sarah's eyes held both wonder and resolve. I won't run this time. Sheriff Cooper arrived within an hour of Jack's call, his patrol car crunching over the frozen gravel. Sarah paced the kitchen, still shaken from Richard's appearance. Describe the vehicle again? Cooper asked, notebook open. Black Audi. Latest model, Jack supplied. Minnesota plates. Started with JRH. Cooper nodded. His vanity plates. I'll have deputies watching for it. Pastor Miller arrived shortly after, his kind face creased with concern. Jack had called him too, remembering the pastor mentioning his previous career as a legal aid attorney. Richard threatened the ranch, Sarah explained, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Said he could cause legal complications. Miller considered this intimidation tactic, but not entirely baseless. Men with resources can create problems. What's our best move? Jack asked. Document everything, Miller advised. Record any future interactions if possible. And Sarah needs legal protection. Cooper nodded agreement. Restraining order is a start, but Harwood seems the type to consider those optional. Sarah looked between them. He won't stop. This is a game to him now. Then we change the game, Cooper said, his weathered face determined. I've been making calls to Minneapolis. Found 2 other women with similar experiences with Harwood. Neither filed charges, too afraid. But they're willing to provide statements now. Hope flashed across Sarah's face. Tessa and Diane? Cooper nodded. They remember you. Said you were kind to them when Harwood wasn't. Building a pattern of behavior strengthens your position, Miller explained. Makes your story more credible to authorities. Jack listened intently, his hand resting protectively near Sarah's on the table. What about his threats against the ranch? Miller rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Property disputes can get messy. If he claims Sarah has some ownership interest in his assets, he might try to entangle your ranch as retaliation. But she doesn't, Jack protested. Doesn't matter. The legal process itself becomes the punishment. Miller's eyes moved between them. Unless what? Sarah prompted. Miller hesitated. There's a legal concept called marriage privilege. Spouses can't be compelled to testify against each other. And marital property has certain protections. A weighted silence filled the kitchen. Jack stared at Miller, understanding slowly dawning. "Are you suggesting we get married?" Sarah asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Legally, it would complicate Harwood's strategy," Miller confirmed. "Create a barrier between you and him." "A marriage of convenience," Cooper said practically. "Been known to happen." Jack found himself unable to look at Sarah, emotions too complex to sort through in front of their visitors. The idea wasn't unwelcome, far from it, but not like this. Not as a legal strategy. "We need time to discuss this," he said finally. After Cooper and Miller left, promising to return the next day, an awkward silence descended. Sarah moved to the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall. "It's just a suggestion," she said quietly. "We don't have to." "Sarah." Jack stepped beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Marriage isn't something I take lightly." "I know." Her eyes remained on the falling snow. "It's too much to ask." "That's not what I meant." Jack gently turned her to face him. "If we did this, I wouldn't want it to be just about Richard." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Jack, these past weeks..." He struggled, words inadequate for the transformation she'd brought to his life. "You've made this place a home again." Sarah's expression softened. "You've given me something I've never had before. Safety. Belonging. Is that enough?" Jack asked, the question layered with meaning. "It's everything," she whispered. Jack moved to his desk, retrieving a worn envelope from the bottom drawer. From it, he withdrew a folded document, the ranch's deed. "Caroline and I bought this place with nothing but hope and hard work," he said, spreading the paper on the table. "It was our dream." Sarah touched the document gently. "And you promised her you'd keep it?" "Yes." Jack took a pen, his decision crystallizing into certainty. "But promises evolve." With deliberate strokes, he added Sarah's name beside his own on the ownership line. Sarah gasped. "Jack, you can't?" "Already did." He met her eyes steadily. "Now Richard can't touch it. It's ours." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she stared at her name on the deed. "Why would you do this?" Jack took her hands, his heart finally outpacing his caution. "Because I love you." The words, unused for so long, felt both foreign and inevitable on his tongue. Sarah's breath caught. For a moment she stood frozen, as if unable to believe what she'd heard. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I have for weeks." Jack held her close, the woman who'd arrived as a stranger and somehow become essential to his world. Whatever came next, Richard, legal battles, the uncertain future, they would face it together. Later, as evening settled around them, Jack asked the question properly, not as a legal strategy or a defense against Richard, but as a man who'd found an unexpected second chance at happiness. Sarah's yes was all the Christmas gift he needed. Christmas Eve arrived with picture-perfect snowfall, large, lazy flakes drifting past windows trimmed with the simple greenery Sarah had arranged. Inside, the ranch house glowed with warmth it hadn't known in years. Jack adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror, the formal attire still uncomfortable despite recent practice. Sarah had insisted they attend the Christmas Eve service, and he found himself unable to deny her anything. She appeared in the doorway wearing a deep green dress they'd found in Elk Valley's small boutique. Her hair, arranged in soft waves, caught the light from the hall lamp. "You look beautiful," Jack said, the words inadequate for the transformation before him, not just in her appearance, but in the confidence she now carried. Sarah smiled, stepping forward to straighten his tie. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy." The drive to town was peaceful, Christmas lights twinkling from farmhouses scattered across the valley. Jack found Sarah's hand resting naturally in his, her engagement ring, his grandmother's, retrieved from the safe deposit box, catching occasional gleams from passing lights. Elk Valley's church overflowed with seasonal attendants, the parking area filled with vehicles from surrounding ranches and farms. Jack noticed Richard's black Audi immediately, parked conspicuously near the entrance. "He's here," Sarah said quietly, her hand tightening in Jack's. "So are we." Jack scanned the crowd, spotting Sheriff Cooper speaking with Pastor Miller near the steps. "And we're not alone." Cooper approached as they parked. Harwood showed up with his lawyer. Said he's just attending service, nothing more. "He's planning something," Sarah said with certainty. "Let him," Cooper replied. "Just remember what we discussed. No confrontations inside the church. Let him make the first aggressive move." The interior glowed with candlelight and poinsettias. Jack felt Sarah straighten beside him as they entered, her eyes finding Richard immediately. He sat in the front row, his expensive coat making him conspicuous among the rancher's Sunday best. As they moved toward a middle pew, whispers followed, the town's curiosity about Jack and Sarah, their sudden engagement, the stranger in their midst. Jack positioned himself protectively at the aisle, Sarah beside him. Pastor Miller's service spoke of hope found in unlikely places, of light entering darkness. Jack found himself genuinely moved, Sarah's hand warm in his as they sang carols together. During the final hymn, Jack noticed Richard rising, his lawyer close behind. They positioned themselves near the center aisle, clearly intending to intercept Jack and Sarah as they left. "Ready?" Jack whispered as the service concluded. Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Together." They rose, moving deliberately toward the exit. Richard stepped forward, blocking their path. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying in the now quiet church. "We need to talk." "Nothing to discuss, Richard," she replied evenly. "Please let us pass." Richard's pleasant facade remained, though his eyes hardened. "I've been patient. Allowed you time to reconsider. Now it's time to come home." Jack stepped slightly forward. "She is home." The entire congregation had fallen silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Sheriff Cooper moved closer, his presence a silent warning. "This doesn't concern you, Thornton," Richard said dismissively. "Sarah and I have private matters to resolve." "Anything concerning my fiancée concerns me," Jack replied, his calm voice belying the tension in his shoulders. Richard's lawyer intervened smoothly. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Harwood is prepared to be generous despite your indiscretions. A quiet resolution benefits everyone." "There's nothing to resolve," Sarah stated firmly. "I left Richard because he abused me. I've started a new life. That's all." A murmur ran through the congregation. Richard's composure slipped momentarily, his voice lowering to a threatening hiss. "You ungrateful little liar. After everything I gave you." "What you gave came with a price," Sarah interrupted, her voice stronger than Jack had ever heard it. "Control. Isolation. Fear." "Be careful, Sarah," Richard warned, his public mask slipping further. "You have no idea what I can do to you. To your precious ranch. To your new friend." Irene Baker stepped forward unexpectedly, her elderly frame surprisingly formidable. "Young man, I don't know who you are, but we don't tolerate threats in our church." Several other community members moved closer, forming a protective circle around Jack and Sarah. Tom Wilson, Bill Henderson, Martha from the general store, the very neighbors Jack had avoided for years now standing with him. Richard's eyes darted around, calculating his diminishing advantage. "This is absurd. She's confused. Unwell." "She seems perfectly fine to me," Sheriff Cooper interjected, badge visible on his belt. "Mr. Harwood, I suggest you leave." "Voluntarily." "This is a public place," Richard's lawyer protested. "And these folks have made it clear you're not welcome," Cooper replied. "I'd hate to arrest someone on Christmas Eve. Creates a mountain of paperwork." Richard's control finally shattered. "You think these hicks scare me? Do you know who I am?" "A man who hurts women," Jack stated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have no proof," Richard snarled, grabbing Sarah's arm roughly. "She's coming with me." The action crossed the line Cooper had been waiting for. "That's assault, sir. Release her now." When Richard only tightened his grip, Cooper moved swiftly, separating them and securing Richard's wrists behind his back. "Richard Harwood, you're under arrest for assault," Cooper recited calmly as gasps echoed through the church. Jack wrapped his arm protectively around Sarah, who stood remarkably composed as she watched her former tormentor being led away. Dawn filtered through frost-edged windows, painting the bedroom in gentle golden light. Jack woke slowly, momentarily confused by the warm weight against his chest. Sarah slept peacefully beside him, her breathing deep and even, perhaps truly restful for the first time since her arrival. Last night, after Richard's arrest, the community had rallied around them in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. Irene Baker insisted they come to her home for hot chocolate. Tom Wilson and his wife offered statements about Richard's threatening behavior. Even Martha from the general store had approached Sarah with unexpected warmth, squeezing her hand and whispering, "That man had bad written all over him." Sheriff Cooper had called late in the evening. Richard was being held on assault charges, with additional concerns emerging. During processing, they discovered 3 outstanding complaints against him in other states, women who'd previously worked for him, their stories eerily similar to Sarah's. "He won't make bail tonight," Cooper had assured them. "Not on Christmas Eve in rural Montana." Now, watching the sunrise paint Sarah's face with gentle light, Jack felt a peace he'd thought lost forever. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face. "Merry Christmas," she murmured, her voice still soft with sleep. "Merry Christmas." Jack brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, marveling at how natural this intimacy had become. They lingered over coffee at the kitchen table, watching snow fall through the windows. Rusty lay contentedly at Sarah's feet, his devoted companionship now firmly established. "I have something for you," Jack said, retrieving a small package from beneath the tree. Sarah accepted it with surprise. "We agreed no gifts." "Not exactly a gift," Jack explained. "More of a return." Inside the simple wrapping, Sarah found a small wooden box Jack had crafted in his workshop. Her fingers traced the delicate pine pattern inlaid on its lid before opening it. Inside lay a small golden ring, simple but elegant in its design. "It was my mother's," Jack explained. "Then Caroline wore it for 22 years. Sarah looked up, eyes wide. "Jack, I promised Caroline I'd keep the ranch," he continued, taking her hand. "But I think she'd approve of sharing it, and this, with you." Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger beside the engagement band, a perfect fit. "It's beautiful." "Pastor Miller can perform the ceremony whenever we're ready," Jack said. "No rush." Sarah surprised him with a decisive shake of her head. "Today. Today," Jack repeated, startled. "But it's Christmas." "Exactly." Her eyes held a certainty that took his breath away. "I don't want to wait. Do you?" Jack considered the strange, miraculous journey that had brought them here, from a rain-soaked stranger at his gate to the woman who had restored his home and heart. "No," he answered honestly. "I don't want to wait another day." One phone call to Pastor Miller confirmed he would be delighted to perform a small ceremony that afternoon. "Christmas weddings are special," he assured them. "The church is already decorated beautifully." They prepared with a sense of peaceful purpose. Jack retrieved his suit while Sarah pressed the green dress she'd worn the previous evening. They worked together preparing a simple holiday meal, moving around the kitchen with the synchronicity of partners who anticipated each other's needs. As afternoon approached, Sarah grew quiet, standing before the living room window with an expression Jack couldn't read. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently, coming to stand beside her. "No." She turned to him with surprising brightness in her eyes. "Just realizing something." "What's that?" "My whole life, I've been leaving places. Running from something." Her hand found his. "This is the first time I'm choosing to stay. To build something." Jack understood completely. They were both starting over, creating something neither had expected to find again. Pastor Miller arrived early, bringing his wife and a small bouquet of winter greenery and holly berries for Sarah. "From our greenhouse," Mrs. Miller explained. "Every bride should have flowers." The ceremony was simple and profound. In the living room before the Christmas tree, with Rusty as their only attendant, Jack and Sarah exchanged vows that acknowledged their unusual journey. "From unexpected beginnings come the greatest blessings," Pastor Miller observed as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Jack kissed his bride, he felt the final pieces of his broken world fall perfectly into place. Later, as twilight gathered, a surprise knock at the door revealed Irene Baker, Tom and Lisa Wilson, Sheriff Cooper, and several other Elk Valley residents, their arms laden with covered dishes and small gifts. "Can't have a wedding without a celebration," Irene declared, sweeping past Jack into the kitchen. "Hope you don't mind." Jack looked to Sarah, expecting discomfort at the invasion. Instead, she welcomed them with genuine joy, accepting hugs and congratulations as if she'd known these people all her life. "Mrs. Thornton," Sheriff Cooper said with a respectful nod as he presented a small package. "Welcome to our community. Officially." Sarah's smile at the new name illuminated the room. "Thank you for everything." As their unexpected guests filled the house with warmth and conversation, Jack pulled Sarah briefly aside. "Okay with all this?" She nodded, watching the scene with wonder. "More than okay. It's perfect." Snow dusted the ranch in a pristine December blanket, the morning sun casting long shadows across familiar terrain. Jack stood on the porch, coffee steam rising in the crisp air, watching Sarah in the distance. She moved confidently among the cattle, her experienced hands checking the pregnant heifers they'd invested in last spring. 1 year. Sometimes it seemed impossible that only 12 months had passed since a rain-soaked stranger had appeared at his gate. Other times, it felt as if Sarah had always been part of the landscape of his life, as essential as the mountains on the horizon. The ranch had transformed under their joint stewardship. The mortgage was current, the buildings repaired, the herd expanded. Sarah's practical financial management combined with Jack's ranching knowledge had turned the struggling operation into something sustainable. More profound was the transformation inside the house. Rooms once shrouded in grief now bustled with life and purpose. The piano played regularly. The kitchen hosted community gatherings. Laughter had returned to spaces long haunted by silence. Sarah approached the house, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. "Daisy's close," she reported, stomping snow from her boots. "Probably tonight." Jack nodded, making a mental note to check the barn later. Beth Henderson called. "Their holiday party is Saturday." "Did you accept?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. Jack's reintegration into community life had been gradual but steady under her gentle encouragement. "Told her we'd bring those cranberry cookies you made last week." He held the door for her, enjoying the domestic rhythm they'd established. Inside, Sarah paused to admire the Christmas tree they'd decorated the previous evening. "It's even better than last year's." "We've had practice now," Jack replied, his arms settling naturally around her waist. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. Through the window, they spotted an unfamiliar car navigating the driveway. "Expecting someone?" Sarah asked, a hint of old wariness in her voice. The past year had brought closure on many fronts. Richard had ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges, accepting a sentence that included a permanent restraining order and mandatory counseling. Sheriff Cooper had kept them informed throughout the process, his initial professional interest in Sarah evolving into genuine friendship with them both. Still, unexpected visitors triggered a vigilance neither of them might ever fully shed. Jack stepped onto the porch as the car parked. A slender woman emerged, her resemblance to Sarah immediately apparent despite their different coloring. "Rebecca?" Sarah's voice held disbelief as she appeared beside Jack. The woman approached hesitantly. "Sarah. I hope it's okay that I came." Jack watched as his wife stood frozen, staring at the sister she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. "Pastor Miller helped me find you," Rebecca explained into the silence. "I've been trying for years, but with your name change after." "Richard," Sarah supplied, her voice steadier than Jack expected. Rebecca nodded. "I didn't know what happened to you. Mom died last year and she faltered. I didn't want to lose my sister too." Something in Sarah's posture softened. She stepped forward, meeting her sister halfway up the path. Their embrace was tentative at first, then fierce, years of separation dissolving in shared tears. Jack retreated inside, giving them privacy for their reunion. Through the window, he watched the sisters talking, their animated gestures revealing the complex process of reclaiming lost connection. Later, seated around the kitchen table with coffee and leftover cookies, Rebecca studied Sarah with wonder. "You look so happy," she observed. "I almost didn't recognize you." Sarah's hand found Jack's under the table. "I am happy. Happier than I ever thought possible." "And the ranch?" Rebecca asked. "It's beautiful." "It's work," Jack replied with a smile. "But good work." Sarah always loved animals, Rebecca recalled. Even as a little girl, she'd rescue strays, nurse baby birds. This glimpse into his wife's childhood delighted Jack. Despite their deep connection, parts of Sarah's past remained shadows she rarely illuminated. As evening approached, they showed Rebecca to the guest room, formerly Caroline's sewing room, now repurposed with Sarah's practical touch. The sisters made plans for the following day, years of absence creating an urgency to reconnect. After Rebecca retired, Jack and Sarah stood on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. His hand rested gently on the slight swell of her belly, their newest blessing, due in early summer. "Okay," he asked simply, knowing she would understand the layers in his question. Sarah nodded, leaning into his embrace. Family is complicated, but worth rebuilding. Jack thought of the journey that had brought them here, a desperate plea for shelter transforming into a lifetime commitment. One night becoming forever. Together they walked to the old gate where it all began, Jack's arm protective around his wife's shoulders, their footprints marking a path forward in the fresh snow. "You know what tomorrow is?" Sarah asked as they paused at the gate. Jack nodded. "1 year since you arrived." "Best decision I ever made," she said softly, asking if I could stay one night. "Best decision I ever made," Jack replied, saying yes.